On a quiet, suburban avenue in Dundee, Scotland, a successful software engineer was busy renovating his kitchen. To his neighbors, he was a quiet professional who had worked on world-famous video games. To the outside world, he was a respectable homeowner. But inside that house, a terrifying reality was being constructed. This man hadn't just met his partner by chance. He had written a computer code to hunt for her, filtering through thousands of profiles to find a specific type of vulnerability. When police finally crossed the threshold, they didn't just find a messy home. They found a game of hide-and-seek that had ended in the most tragic way imaginable, hidden right beneath the floorboards where he stood. This is the story of how a digital predator was unmasked by a sister's intuition and forensic science. Before we unravel this complex investigation, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support empowers us to continue telling the stories that need to be heard. Now, to understand how a journey of hope turned into a trap, we must start not with the discovery, but with the moment the world went dark, with a sudden, terrifying silence. It was February of the year 2021, when a profound and unsettling silence descended upon a small family network that stretched across thousands of miles, linking the tropical climates of Southeast Asia to the chilling winter winds of the United Kingdom. In the realm of criminal investigations, silence is often the first and most deafening alarm bell. For the experienced detectives in Dundee, Scotland, and their counterparts in Bristol, England, what began as a routine inquiry into a lack of communication would rapidly evolve into one of the most complex and heart-wrenching investigations in modern Scottish legal history. To understand the gravity of the events that unfolded, one must first understand the victim, Bennylyn, and the vital digital lifeline that connected her to her roots. Bennylyn, a woman of resilience and hope, originally hailed from Quezon City in the Philippines. Known to her friends and family as Benny, she was described by those who knew her best as intelligent, resourceful, and deeply devoted to her loved ones. Like many before her, she had traveled across continents in search of stability and a brighter future. She had moved to the United Kingdom in August of the year 2019, settling initially with her husband. However, as is often the case in the complex tapestry of human relationships, circumstances changed. By early 2021, Bennylyn was navigating life as a single parent living in Bristol. Despite the geographical distance and the personal challenges of establishing a life in a foreign land, she maintained an unbreakable bond with her family back home, particularly with her sister. In the digital age, the pattern of communication between family members is a digital footprint of life itself. For Bennylyn and her sister, this footprint was daily and consistent. They exchanged messages, video calls, and updates with a regularity that became the rhythm of their lives. This constant stream of connection is what makes the sudden cessation of contact so jarring. It was not a gradual fading of communication, which might suggest a busy schedule or a broken device. It was an abrupt and total severing of the line. On February 19th, 2021, the messages stopped. The calls went unanswered. The digital presence of a woman who was known for her responsiveness simply vanished. From an investigative perspective, this sudden silence is frequently categorized as a high-risk indicator. When a person with a remarkably consistent pattern of behavior deviates from that norm without explanation, authorities are trained to look beyond the surface. For the family in the Philippines, the anxiety was immediate. The sister, whose intuition would prove to be a driving force in the pursuit of truth, knew that something was fundamentally wrong. This was not characteristic of Bennylyn. Even in moments of difficulty or transition, she had always found a way to signal that she was safe. The silence was not just an absence of noise, it was a presence of danger. The initial days following the disappearance were marked by a frantic attempt to establish contact. The family reached out to anyone who might have information. They contacted Bennylyn's former partner in the United Kingdom, hoping that perhaps she had simply been busy or had traveled without charging her phone. However, the former partner was equally in the dark. He had gone to visit Bennylyn and her daughter at their residence in Bristol, only to find the home empty. There were no signs of a planned departure, no notes left behind, and no indication of where they might have gone. The emptiness of the house mirrored the void in the digital conversation. It is crucial to pause here and analyze the vulnerability inherent in such situations. Individuals who have migrated to new countries often lack the extensive physical support networks, such as longtime neighbors or local extended family that act as a safety net. In these instances, their safety relies heavily on digital communication. When that digital link is severed, the isolation becomes absolute. This reality adds a layer of urgency to missing persons cases involving foreign nationals. The investigation that was about to launch had to bridge the jurisdictional gaps between Bristol in the southwest of England and Dundee in the northeast of Scotland, a distance of hundreds of miles. The timeline established by investigators placed Bennylyn and her daughter, leaving their Bristol home around February 17th or 18th. They were not alone. Surveillance analysis and digital tracking would later reveal that they had traveled in a vehicle driven by a man from Scotland. This journey, initially presented as a visit or a trip, would become the focal point of the inquiry. The movement from the familiar streets of Bristol to the unfamiliar territory of Dundee represented a significant transition, a movement from a place of relative autonomy to a space where control could be exerted by another. As the days turned into weeks without a single verified proof of life, the sister in the Philippines took the decisive step of filing an official missing person report. This act formally mobilized the police forces in the United Kingdom. A missing person report triggers a specific set of protocols. Risk assessments are conducted to determine the level of danger the individual might be in. Given the sudden nature of the disappearance and the involvement of a second individual, Bennylyn's daughter, the case was escalated. Officers began to piece together the digital breadcrumbs left behind. Cell phone tower data, automatic number plate recognition hits, and social media activity. The investigation highlights a critical aspect of modern policing: the reliance on the digital witness. Before a single interview is conducted, data analysts are often already building a picture of the missing person's last known movements. In this case, the data pointed north. It pointed away from the safety of Bristol and towards a residence on Troon Avenue in Dundee. The family's persistence in reporting the silence, combined with the swift action of the authorities to recognize the anomaly in Bennylyn's routine, set the stage for a confrontation with a reality that few could have anticipated. Commentators and legal experts often discuss the concept of coercive control in cases where victims are lured away from their safe environments. While the full extent of the psychological dynamics would only become clear later, the initial phase of this case serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of safety. The decision to travel, likely made with hope or trust, resulted in a total disconnection from the outside world. The silence from Bristol was not merely a missing person case. It was the first chapter of a tragedy that had been quietly unfolding behind closed doors, masked by the anonymity of a suburban street in Scotland. As the authorities prepared to conduct a welfare check at the address in Dundee, the weight of the unknown hung heavily over the investigation. The sisters' unyielding demand for answers had pushed the case across borders, ensuring that Bennylyn and her daughter would not simply become statistics in a long list of the missing. The silence had been broken by the roar of an investigation that was gathering speed, driven by the determination to find the truth hidden within the quiet walls of a stranger's home. The journey from a hopeful meeting to a terrifying void was complete. Now, the journey for justice was about to begin. The trajectory of this investigation shifts from the physical silence of a home in Bristol to the bustling, invisible highways of the internet, where the initial threads of this tragedy were woven. In the modern era, the search for companionship has migrated from community gatherings to digital platforms, creating a vast and often unregulated space where individuals seeking connection can cross paths with those harboring darker intentions. For Bennylyn, a woman navigating the complexities of life in a foreign country after a separation, the digital world offered a potential bridge to a new future. It was reported that she accessed a specific international dating website, a platform designed to connect individuals from the Philippines with partners abroad in hopes of finding a suitable match to help build a stable life. This desire for stability and affection is a fundamental human drive, yet in the context of online dating, it can inadvertently expose individuals to predatory behaviors that are masked by carefully curated profiles. On the other side of this digital equation sat Andrew Innes, a man whose profile suggested stability, intelligence, and worldly experience. A resident of Dundee, Scotland, Innes presented himself as a successful software engineer, a profession that implies a high level of education and logical capability. His background was distinct. He had been born in Germany, educated at a university in Aberdeen, and had previously been employed by a world-renowned gaming company, contributing to major titles that are known globally. He shared details of a past life that included living in Japan and a previous marriage to a Japanese national, painting a picture of a man who was culturally adaptable and family-oriented. To an observer, or indeed to a prospective partner like Bennylyn, these credentials likely signaled safety and reliability, traits that are highly sought after by those looking to establish a secure environment for themselves and their dependents. However, subsequent investigations would reveal that this digital persona concealed a highly calculated and methodical approach to finding a partner. The expertise Innes possessed in software engineering was not merely a career. It was a tool he weaponized to facilitate his objectives. Authorities discovered that he had utilized his technical skills to create a sophisticated computer program capable of harvesting data from dozens of dating websites simultaneously. This program was designed to collect profiles and organize them into a database, effectively turning human beings into data points to be analyzed and filtered. The investigation uncovered that he maintained a spreadsheet where he cataloged potential matches, assigning them scores based on how well they fit his specific criteria. The most chilling aspect of this data collection was the specific parameter he used to filter his search. It was not based on common interests or personality compatibility in the traditional sense. Rather, the primary condition for a high score in his system was that the woman be a single mother. This reveals a predatory mindset that specifically targeted individuals who might be more vulnerable due to their responsibility for others and their potential need for support. By focusing on single mothers, the perpetrator was arguably seeking targets who were not only looking for a partner for themselves but also a father figure for their family, a dynamic that can create a faster and deeper reliance on the new partner. Bennylyn, having unknowingly entered her details into one of the sites he monitored, became a match within this cold, algorithmic search. Despite the underlying machinations, the interaction between Bennylyn and Innes began as a seemingly genuine friendship. They communicated through messages and voice calls, bridging the distance between England and Scotland. Over time, they developed a rapport that Bennylyn likely viewed as a promising foundation for a serious relationship. Innes shared stories of his own family life and his solitude in Scotland following his divorce, creating a narrative of mutual loneliness and a shared desire for a chaotic, free domestic life. This period of grooming is critical in understanding how a victim can be led to trust a stranger. By mirroring her desires for a stable family unit and presenting himself as a solitary figure in need of companionship, he effectively lowered her defenses. The dynamic shifted from virtual to physical when Innes proposed a meeting. While Bennylyn was initially hesitant to accept an invitation to travel to Scotland to meet a man she had never seen in person, the persistence of the digital connection eventually wore down her reservations. It is important to note the power imbalance inherent in this progression. Innes, an established homeowner with significant resources and mobility, held the upper hand against Bennylyn, who was in a more precarious social and economic position. This imbalance was further emphasized when Innes took the initiative to drive the long journey from Dundee to Bristol himself. In February of the year 2021, Innes embarked on an 8-hour drive south to collect Bennylyn and her daughter. This act of driving such a long distance could be interpreted by a hopeful partner as a grand romantic gesture, a sign of commitment and seriousness. However, Viewed through the lens of the subsequent investigation, it appears as a calculated move to extract the victims from their familiar environment and transport them to a location where the perpetrator held absolute control. Upon his arrival in Bristol, he met with Bennylyn and even spoke with her daughter, further solidifying the image of a benevolent potential stepfather. The decision to return to Scotland with him was pivotal. Bennylyn, described as having a kind heart and a desire for a bright future, saw this as an opportunity to explore a relationship that could provide for her family. She was aware that restrictions on movement due to the global health crisis were less severe in his area, offering a chance for her daughter to enjoy the outdoors, a simple maternal wish that Innes likely exploited. They embarked on the return journey north, a trip that symbolized hope for Bennylyn, but was, in reality, a transit into a trap meticulously laid out by a man who viewed people as entries in a spreadsheet. This chapter of the story serves as a stark commentary on the intersection of technology and human vulnerability. The very tools designed to bring people together were subverted to hunt and select victims based on their specific life circumstances. The relationship was not serendipitous. It was the result of a data query. As the car traveled north towards Dundee, carrying Bennylyn and her daughter away from their support network, the digital trap snapped shut, transitioning the danger from the potential of the virtual world to the terrifying reality of the physical one. The silence that would soon follow was not just a loss of signal, but the result of a plan that had been coded and executed long before the first message was ever sent. The logistical undertaking of the events that transpired in mid-February of the year 2021 cannot be overstated, as the sheer distance involved serves as a testament to the calculated determination of the perpetrator. To understand the timeline, one must look at the map of the United Kingdom. Andrew Innes, the software engineer from Dundee, Scotland, initiated a journey that would span hundreds of miles, driving roughly 8 hours from his home in the north down to the city of Bristol in the southwest of England. This was not a casual trip. It was a deliberate expedition. In the context of criminal profiling, the willingness to travel such significant distances often indicates a high degree of motivation and fixation on a specific target. By making the effort to drive to Bennylyn's doorstep, Innes likely reinforced the illusion of a committed, serious suitor, a gesture that can be easily misinterpreted as devotion rather than entrapment. Upon his arrival in Bristol, the interactions between Innes, Bennylyn, and her daughter appeared, to any outside observer, to be the beginning of a blossoming romance. Reports indicate that they spent time together in the city, allowing Bennylyn to assess this man she had previously only known through screens. It is a critical moment in the narrative, where the virtual promise met physical reality. Innes, appearing as the stable professional he claimed to be, extended an invitation that would seal their fate. He proposed that Bennylyn and her daughter accompany him back to Scotland. To persuade her, he utilized a very specific and contextual lever: the varying restrictions of the global health crisis. At that time, different regions of the United Kingdom were under different tiers of lockdown. Innes reportedly informed Bennylyn that his neighborhood in Dundee was subject to fewer restrictions than Bristol, suggesting that a trip north would offer her daughter a chance to enjoy the outdoors and a freedom of movement that was currently impossible in the south. This offer played directly into the natural instincts of a parent, wanting the best for their offspring. The prospect of open spaces and a reprieve from the confinement of city lockdowns was a powerful incentive. Consequently, Bennylyn agreed to the journey. However, the nature of this agreement is crucial to the investigation. Evidence suggests that Bennylyn viewed this excursion as a temporary visit, a short holiday rather than a permanent relocation. When she left her residence in Bristol, she did not pack extensive luggage or personal belongings that would indicate a move. Furthermore, there was an understanding, later discovered by investigators, that she intended to return quickly. A return schedule was seemingly in place, with the expectation that she would be back in Bristol by the evening of the 19th of February. This detail is heartbreaking in hindsight, as it confirms that she had no intention of abandoning her life in England. She believed she was merely going on a weekend trip. On the 18th of February, 2021, the group departed Bristol. The vehicle, driven by Innes, contained a configuration of passengers that likely put Bennylyn at ease. It was not just Innes, Bennylyn, and her daughter. There was a fourth passenger, another young girl, unconnected to Bennylyn, who was also in the car. The presence of this second child is a significant psychological element. In the eyes of a mother like Bennylyn, the presence of another young person would have served as a powerful validation of Innes's character. It projected the image of a safe, family-oriented environment. It is a common tactic in deceptive practices to use props or third parties to lower the defenses of a target. Seeing another child comfortable in his presence would have silenced many internal alarm bells. The drive north was long, traversing the backbone of the country. During this journey, the atmosphere was reported to be positive, even joyful. Bennylyn and the children were observed looking at the scenery, snapping photographs, and behaving like a typical family unit on an adventure. At one point during the journey, Innes pulled the vehicle over to the side of the road to rest his eyes, a mundane act that further normalized the situation. It was during this pause that Bennylyn made what would be her final video call to her sister. In this call, she expressed that she was having a pleasant time and enjoying the trip. She appeared happy, unaware of the precipice upon which she stood. This call is haunting not for what was said, but for what it represented, the last verified moment of her autonomy and connection to the outside world. As the car crossed the border into Scotland and eventually arrived in the city of Dundee, the dynamic quietly shifted. They arrived at the house on Troon Avenue, a detached property in a quiet neighborhood. To the neighbors, nothing would have seemed amiss, a man returning home with a woman and children. However, the reality of the situation was that Bennylyn had now been transported nearly 500 miles away from her support system. She was in a house she did not know, in a city where she had no friends, with a man who was, for all intents and purposes, a stranger. The lack of luggage she brought with her stands as a stark symbol of her unpreparedness for what was to come. She had traveled light, expecting a brief interlude of happiness, unaware that she had stepped into a meticulously prepared environment from which there would be no return journey. From an analytical perspective, this journey highlights the extreme vulnerability of individuals who place their trust in the hands of new partners found through digital channels. The physical displacement of a victim is a key stage in the cycle of control. By moving Bennylyn from Bristol to Dundee, Innes achieved total isolation. In Bristol, she had a home, a routine, and presumably neighbors who knew her. In Dundee, she was invisible, entirely dependent on Innes for shelter, transport, and basic needs. The presence of the second young girl in the car acted as a camouflage, masking the danger until the destination was reached. As the door to the house on Troon Avenue closed behind them, the open road and the freedom of the journey were replaced by the confines of a private residence that was secretly undergoing strange and chaotic modifications. The trap, set through algorithms and secured through miles of asphalt, had finally been sprung. The period immediately following the disappearance of Bennylyn and her daughter was characterized not by a complete void of information, but by a disturbing sequence of digital misdirection that investigators would later identify as a calculated attempt to delay the inevitable discovery of the truth. On the 19th of February, the day Bennylyn was expected to return to her life in Bristol, her sister in the Philippines attempted to establish contact. The daily rhythm of their communication had been broken. Calls went unanswered, and messages remained unread, a deviation from routine that immediately triggered alarm within the family. It was not merely a missed call. It was a sudden digital silence that stood in stark contrast to the joyful video conversation that had taken place just the day before during the journey north. The silence was punctuated on the 20th of February, not by Bennylyn herself, but by a series of communications from Andrew Innes that raised more questions than they answered. When the sister reached out to Innes, Desperate for information regarding Bennylyn's whereabouts, she received a response that seemed crafted to deflect suspicion rather than offer comfort. Innes claimed that Bennylyn had met another man at a coffee shop, possibly facilitated through a dating application, and had subsequently decided to leave with this stranger and her daughter to the city of Glasgow. This narrative, presented by Innes, suggested a spontaneous and erratic decision-making process that those who knew Bennylyn found impossible to believe. The story painted a picture of a woman abandoning her plans and safety to run off with an unknown individual, a scenario that clashed violently with her character as a responsible and cautious parent. To substantiate this implausible story, Innes provided further details that played upon existing anxieties. He alleged that Bennylyn was engaged in a dispute with her former husband regarding the custody of their daughter and was fearful that the police or other authorities might locate her. According to Innes, this fear was the primary motivation for her to turn off her mobile device and run away into obscurity. This explanation was tactically astute. By invoking the fear of law enforcement and custody battles, the perpetrator likely hoped to convince the family that Bennylyn's silence was a voluntary act of self-preservation. It was a narrative designed to discourage the family from contacting the police, as doing so would theoretically jeopardize Bennylyn's desire to remain hidden. However, the sister was not swayed by this fabrication. She noted that if Bennylyn had formulated such a drastic plan to flee or relocate, she would have undoubtedly confided in her closest sibling. The bond they shared was transparent, and the idea that Bennylyn would vanish without a word to her sister was simply not credible. Driven by rising panic, the sister messaged Innes directly, asking the blunt and chilling question, "Is my sister still alive?" In response to this direct confrontation, Innes offered a dismissal that was both patronizing and demonstrably false in the context of the events. He assured her not to worry, stating that Scotland was a very peaceful place where crime did not happen and that Bennylyn was safe. This attempt to normalize the situation by appealing to the reputation of the location was a psychological maneuver intended to gaslight the concerned family member, making their fears seem irrational or hysterical. As the sister continued to press for proof of life, the digital deception evolved. Innes eventually forwarded a video clip of Bennylyn to the sister. To an uncritical eye, this might have served as confirmation that she was well. Yet, the sister scrutinized the footage and immediately sensed that something was amiss. The video appeared to be outdated, a recording made in the past that did not reflect the current reality. It was a recycled proof of life, a piece of digital debris thrown out to buy time. This specific tactic, using old media to simulate a current presence, is a hallmark of modern crimes involving digital impersonation. It reveals a perpetrator who is managing a crisis, attempting to maintain a facade of normalcy while the reality behind the scenes is catastrophic. Forensic behavioral analysts often highlight the difficulty of successfully mimicking another person's digital voice. Each individual has a unique way of constructing sentences, a specific vocabulary, and a distinct tone in their text messages. When a perpetrator attempts to impersonate a victim using their device, they often fail to replicate these subtle linguistic nuances. The sister's intuition that the messages did not sound like Bennylyn was likely a subconscious recognition of this linguistic dissonance. The messages were coming from Bennylyn's account, but the voice behind them was alien. The narrative of the man in Glasgow was a classic diversionary tactic, intended to shift the geographical focus of any potential search away from Dundee and towards a larger, more anonymous city, thereby diluting police resources and attention. Following this unsatisfactory exchange, the communication from Innes ceased, and he, too, eventually lost contact with the family. For 2 agonizing weeks, the sister waited for a call that never came, her suspicion hardening into a certainty that a tragedy had occurred. This period of delay is often the most damaging in missing persons investigations. The false messages and the Glasgow story successfully bought the perpetrator time to alter the crime scene, time to dispose of evidence, and time to construct a defense. However, They also served as evidence of consciousness of guilt. An innocent individual, upon finding their guest missing, would typically contact authorities or express shared concern. They would not invent elaborate backstories involving fictional strangers and custody disputes. The red flags in this chapter of the investigation serve as a cautionary lesson on the limitations of digital communication. A text message or a social media update is not definitive proof of a person's safety or location. In this case, the technology that was meant to keep the family connected was weaponized against them, used to weave a web of lies that kept the police at bay for several critical weeks. It was only when the sister, refusing to accept the digital falsehoods, formally reported Bennylyn missing in early March that the veil of deception began to lift. The investigation was no longer about a woman who had run away. It was about unraveling a narrative that had been constructed to hide a dark and irreversible truth. The silence had been filled with lies, but the lies themselves were beginning to unravel, pointing the finger of suspicion directly back to the house on Troon Avenue. The transition from a private family crisis to a formal police investigation marks a pivotal shift in the narrative, moving from the realm of personal anxiety to the structured, procedural world of law enforcement. By early March of the year 2021, the silence from Bennylyn had become deafening enough to override any lingering hope that this was merely a communication breakdown. Her sister, despite being thousands of miles away in the Philippines, made the critical decision to formally report Bennylyn and her daughter as missing persons. This act initiated a chain of events that highlights both the challenges and the capabilities of modern policing when dealing with cross-border disappearances. Initially, the investigation faced a significant hurdle. While the sister knew of the existence of the man from Dundee, she lacked his specific address or full personal details, leaving authorities with a name but no immediate location to check. The breakthrough in the case serves as a testament to the digital surveillance grid that underpins modern society. Without a specific address, investigators turned to the technological footprint left by the journey itself. Police forces coordinated to analyze traffic camera data and automatic number plate recognition systems, scanning the vast network of roads connecting the southwest of England to the northeast of Scotland. This forensic reconstruction of travel history allowed them to identify the vehicle that had transported Bennylyn away from her home. The data was irrefutable. It pinpointed the car's movement and, crucially, led officers directly to the registered owner's address on Troon Avenue in Dundee. This technological link bridged the gap that the sisters' limited information could not, turning a general search into a focused inquiry at a specific doorstep. On the 5th of March, 2021, the investigation moved from the digital realm to the physical. Officers from Police Scotland arrived at the detached property in Dundee to conduct a welfare check. This procedure is a standard police function designed to verify the safety of individuals who have not been seen or heard from. However, upon their arrival, the officers were met with immediate resistance. Andrew Innes answered the door but kept it partially closed, a defensive posture that instantly raised suspicion among the attending officers. He attempted to bar their entry, using a series of fabricated excuses that exploited the social norms of the time. Innes reportedly told the police that they could not enter because a member of his household was currently bathing and needed to get dressed. Furthermore, he invoked the context of the global health crisis, claiming that he was self-isolating due to health regulations. These excuses were calculated attempts to use privacy and public health protocols as a shield against scrutiny. It is a common psychological tactic for individuals concealing illicit activities to hide behind social conventions, hoping that politeness or bureaucratic adherence to rules will deter authority figures from pressing further. However, the intuition of the officers on the scene proved sharper than Innes's deflections. Through the gap in the door and the windows, officers were able to observe the interior of the residence. They noticed a young individual inside the living room, whose presence contradicted the calm facade Innes was attempting to project. The demeanor of the homeowner evasive, nervous, and obstructive, combined with the visual cues from within the house, provided the officers with sufficient cause to override his objections. In a decisive moment that likely saved the life of the survivor present, the police issued a warning and stepped across the threshold, entering the property to ensure the welfare of the occupants. The atmosphere inside the house was immediately jarring. While a detailed forensic examination of the environment would come later, the initial impression was one of chaos and significant disarray, which stood in stark contrast to the suburban exterior. Confronted by the sudden authority of the law and the collapse of his privacy, Innes's resistance crumbled with shocking rapidity. The officers, focused on their primary objective, asked the direct question: where was Bennylyn? The response they received was devoid of the elaborate lies that had characterized his text messages to the family weeks prior. In a moment of chilling candor, Innes abandoned the Glasgow narrative entirely. He stated plainly to the officers that he had taken Bennylyn's life. When asked for her location, he gestured to the very ground they stood upon, admitting that she was buried beneath the floorboards of the house. This confession was not extracted through lengthy interrogation, but was offered almost immediately upon the breach of his sanctuary. The officers then pressed for the whereabouts of Bennylyn's daughter. Innes's reply confirmed the worst fears of the investigation. He admitted that the daughter was also deceased and had been placed alongside her mother. The justification he offered that the daughter would have been distressed without her mother revealed a warped and proprietary logic that chilled the investigators. In an instant, a welfare check had transformed into a double homicide inquiry. Andrew Innes was immediately detained, and the house on Troon Avenue was sealed off, marking the end of the search and the beginning of a pursuit for justice that would require unearthing the dark secrets hidden beneath the concrete. The moment the officers from Police Scotland crossed the threshold of the residence on Troon Avenue, the veneer of suburban normalcy that had protected Andrew Innes completely dissolved. From the street, the property appeared to be a standard, detached home in a quiet neighborhood, indistinguishable from the houses surrounding it. However, the interior presented a scene that veteran investigators would later describe as disorienting and fundamentally disturbing. The environment was not merely untidy. It was in a state of chaotic deconstruction that signaled a profound disruption in the order of daily life. The hallway and living spaces were cluttered with a confusion of items that did not belong together. Furniture was pushed aside haphazardly, and the floor was littered with the debris of what appeared to be significant renovation work. To the trained eye of a law enforcement officer, the condition of a home often reflects the state of mind of its occupant. In this case, the disarray was extreme. The kitchen, usually the heart of a home, was filled with stacks of pots, pans, and culinary equipment piled high without logic or organization. Tiles had been stripped from the floor, leaving the underlying surface exposed and uneven. Construction tools and heavy machinery were scattered among domestic items, creating a hazardous landscape that felt industrial rather than residential. It was a physical manifestation of a life that had spiraled out of control, yet it was being managed by a man who claimed to be a meticulous software engineer. The most jarring element of this chaotic scene was not the debris itself, but the presence of life amidst the disorder. In the living room, amidst the dust and the displaced furniture, officers located a mattress placed directly on the floor. Sleeping upon it was the young girl who had been seen during the initial journey from Bristol. The sight of a child resting in what effectively resembled a building site provided immediate and undeniable confirmation that the welfare of the occupants was severely compromised. It was a visual contradiction. Innocence surrounded by the sharp edges of demolition that heightened the urgency of the police intervention. The officers, who had initially been held at the door by Innes's excuses of privacy and hygiene, now understood that their instinct to enter had been correct. With the perimeter secured and the immediate safety of the visible child established, the focus of the police shifted instantly to the primary objective of their visit: locating Bennylyn and her daughter. The atmosphere in the room was tense, charged with the unspoken realization that something was terribly wrong. An officer confronted Innes, asking the question that had driven the investigation for weeks. Where was the woman who had come to visit him? The expectation might have been another layer of deception, perhaps a repetition of the story that she had fled to Glasgow or returned to England. Instead, Innes offered a confession that was as immediate as it was chilling. In a matter of moments, the facade of the misunderstood homeowner vanished, replaced by the cold candor of a killer. He did not claim she was missing. He did not feign ignorance. Standing in the wreckage of his own home, he reportedly told the officers that she was no longer alive. When pressed for a location, he did not point to a map or a distant location. He pointed to the floor. He stated that she was buried right there, beneath the very ground they were standing on. The shock of this admission cannot be overstated. Even for officers with decades of experience, the proximity of the tragedy was startling. The perpetrator had been living, sleeping, and existing for weeks, literally on top of his victims. The confession continued, revealing the fate of Bennylyn's daughter. When asked about the child, Innes displayed a terrifying lack of empathy. He explained that after the mother's life had ended, the child had been distressed and crying for her mother. In a twist of logic that defies human compassion, he admitted that the child had also fallen victim to his actions, placing her alongside her mother because, in his warped reasoning, they should be together. The investigation revealed that this was not a hastily dug shallow grave in a garden, but a concealed tomb within the structure of the house itself. Innes had used the guise of home renovation to cover his tracks. He had concealed the victims beneath the kitchen floor, attempting to permanently hide the evidence of his crime. This use of concrete serves as a significant forensic and psychological marker. It indicates a desire to permanently erase the victims, to solidify their disappearance, and to rebuild a life over the top of their remains. It suggests that Innes intended to continue living in that house, walking daily over the site of the crime, a level of compartmentalization that acts as a hallmark of extreme psychopathy. The discovery at Troon Avenue sent shockwaves through the police force. The lead investigator, a man with 30 years of service, later stated that the depravity of the crime exceeded anything he had witnessed in his entire career. The juxtaposition of the mundane, a suburban house, a software engineer, a visit with the horrific reality of bodies encased in concrete beneath the kitchen floor, created a sense of unreality. The house was designated a major crime scene. Forensic tents were erected. The street was cordoned off, and the quiet neighborhood was transformed into the center of a national inquiry. From an analytical perspective, the state of the house serves as a metaphor for the entire case. Just as the online persona of Andrew Innes masked a predator, the exterior of the house on Troon Avenue masked a tomb. The renovations were not about improvement. They were about concealment. The chaos inside was not just clutter. It was the debris of a violent event and the frantic, heavy labor required to hide it. The confession, obtained in those first few minutes, turned a missing persons case into a double murder investigation, confirming that the silence from Bristol had been caused by the ultimate act of violence hidden under layers of concrete and deception in a cold house in Dundee. Following the chilling admission made by Andrew Innes within the hallway of his home, the investigation immediately transitioned from a welfare check into one of the most complex and sensitive forensic recovery operations ever undertaken by Police Scotland. The quiet residential street in Dundee was transformed overnight. A large perimeter was established, sealing off the area from public view, while forensic tents were erected in the front garden of the detached property. This visual transformation served as a grim signal to the community that a significant and tragic event had occurred within their midst. The house, once a facade of suburban normalcy, was now a sealed crime scene, guarding secrets that required scientific precision to unearth. The challenge facing the authorities was not merely locating the victims, as Innes had already indicated their general location beneath the kitchen floor. The primary difficulty lay in the method of concealment. The perpetrator had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide his actions, burying the victims in the earth beneath the house, and then pouring a layer of concrete over the site to seal it. This created a formidable physical barrier. To retrieve the victims with the dignity they deserved, and to preserve crucial forensic evidence that would be vital for the prosecution. The police could not simply break through the floor with heavy machinery. Such a blunt approach risked damaging the remains and compromising the integrity of the investigation. Consequently, the operation required a multidisciplinary team of highly specialized experts. The police force enlisted the aid of forensic anthropologists, archaeologists, and geologists to guide the excavation. These experts are trained to read the soil and the environment, treating the site with the same care one might apply to a historical dig. Their goal was to deconstruct the layers of concealment methodically, documenting every stratum of soil, concrete, and debris. This meticulous process meant that the recovery was not the work of hours, but of days. It took approximately 2 weeks of painstaking labor to fully excavate the site and recover the victims. This duration speaks to the density of the concealment and the rigorous standards of the forensic team. On the 19th of March, the operation reached its somber conclusion. The remains of the child were discovered first, followed by the discovery of Bennylyn further beneath. They had been wrapped in materials such as blankets and tarpaulins before being placed in the ground. The location was confirmed to be directly under the kitchen area, a detail that adds a disturbing layer of domestic horror to the case. The perpetrator had continued to live his life, presumably cooking and eating, directly above the place where he had concealed the victims. This proximity demonstrates a profound level of detachment and compartmentalization, allowing him to coexist with the evidence of his actions. Once the recovery was complete, the focus shifted to the medical examination to determine the cause of the tragedy. The findings of the post-mortem analysis were harrowing, revealing the extreme violence that had been inflicted. Forensic pathologists determined that Bennylyn had sustained fatal injuries caused by significant force. Specifically, evidence pointed to the use of a heavy tool found within the residence. Additionally, the examination revealed further evidence of a weapon being used. The combination of these injuries indicated a sustained and brutal assault rather than a momentary lapse of control. Regarding the child, the medical findings were equally distressing, confirming that she had been harmed explicitly by the perpetrator. The investigation also utilized DNA analysis to confirm the identity of the victims and to link the perpetrator to the crime. Forensic evidence found on the victims directly implicated Innes, providing irrefutable biological proof of his involvement. The delay in the discovery Bennylyn and her daughter had been missing for weeks meant that the forensic timeline was critical in disproving any subsequent lies the perpetrator might tell about when the events occurred. During the subsequent legal proceedings, Innes would attempt to frame the burial as a respectful act. He claimed that he had buried them solemnly and had even performed religious rites, suggesting a degree of remorse or care. However, the reality of the recovery operation painted a starkly different picture. The victims were not laid to rest in a dignified manner. They were discarded beneath a layer of concrete and debris, hidden alongside construction waste. The presence of the concrete and the new tiling on the floor demonstrated a clear intent to conceal the crime permanently and to prevent discovery, rather than an act of mourning. The recovery operation was a triumph of forensic science and police perseverance. It stripped away the layers of deception, both literal and metaphorical, that Andrew Innes had constructed. By bringing Bennylyn and her daughter out from the darkness of the house and into the care of the authorities, the investigation restored their identities. They were no longer missing persons or nameless victims. They were a mother and child who had been subjected to a grievous wrong. The evidence gathered from beneath the kitchen floor would form the bedrock of the prosecution's case, ensuring that the silence imposed upon them by their captor would be broken by the loud and undeniable voice of forensic truth in the courtroom. To understand the magnitude of the tragedy that unfolded in Dundee, investigators and the public were forced to reconcile the brutal nature of the crime with the seemingly respectable facade of the man responsible. In the annals of criminal history, there is often a comforting but false assumption that those capable of extreme violence exist on the margins of society, visibly unstable or lacking in social standing. Andrew Innes shattered this stereotype completely. As the police peeled back the layers of his life, they did not find a chaotic drifter, but a highly educated, professionally accomplished individual who had successfully navigated the upper echelons of the technology sector. This sharp contrast between his public resume and his private depravity became a central point of analysis for criminal profilers and the media alike. Born in Germany, Innes moved through life with the credentials of a man destined for success. His academic journey brought him to the United Kingdom, where he attended the University of Aberdeen. There, he cultivated the intellectual skills that would define his career. He graduated and entered the workforce as a software engineer, a role that demands logic, precision, and an ability to construct complex systems. His career trajectory was impressive. He eventually secured employment with a globally recognized video game development company, Rockstar North. This was not a minor position. He was working at the forefront of the digital entertainment industry, contributing to projects that were consumed by millions of people worldwide. To his colleagues in the professional world, he was a capable engineer, a man who understood the intricate language of code and the architecture of virtual worlds. This professional background is significant because it suggests a high level of cognitive function. Innes was not a man who acted out of confusion or a lack of understanding. He was a systems thinker. In his professional life, he built controlled environments where every action had a predictable reaction and where the creator held absolute authority over the simulation. Psychologists often debate whether such professions attract individuals who crave control or if the profession itself reinforces those traits. In the case of Innes, it appears that the desire to script and control outcomes bled dangerously from his computer screen into his interactions with actual human beings. He possessed the intelligence to contribute positively to society, yet he chose to apply his intellect towards the manipulation and destruction of others. The investigation into his personal history revealed a life that was, for a long time, outwardly conventional. Following his education and early career, Innes married a woman from Japan. He embraced this international connection, moving to Japan with his family. During this period, he was a husband and a father to 3 of his own offspring, living a life that many would aspire to an expatriate professional raising a family abroad. This detail is particularly chilling in hindsight. It proves that Innes was fully capable of maintaining long-term domestic relationships and understood the social contract of a family unit. He was not ignorant of the bonds between parents and their offspring. He had experienced them firsthand. This knowledge makes his subsequent actions against Bennylyn and her daughter even more heinous, as he dismantled a family unit similar to one he had once headed himself. However, the stability of his life in Japan eventually fractured. The marriage ended in divorce, a pivotal event that seems to have marked a turning point in his trajectory. Following the separation, Innes returned to the United Kingdom in the year 2019. He settled in Dundee, Scotland, a city known for its contributions to the video game industry, likely a strategic move for a man with his specific skill set. But this time, he was returning alone. The transition from a family man in Japan to a solitary figure in a large house in Scotland created a vacuum in his life. Neighbors described a man who kept to himself, the archetype of the quiet neighbor often cited in the aftermath of such discoveries. Living alone in the large, detached house on Troon Avenue, Innes appeared to fester in his isolation. The breakdown of his previous life and the loss of control over his personal circumstances seemingly fueled a deep-seated resentment. It was during this period of solitude that the talented but flawed nature of his character began to manifest in darker ways. Instead of using his coding skills to rebuild his career or connect with the community, he began to turn them inward, focusing on his own desires and grievances. The investigation suggests that he felt aggrieved by his past relationships, harboring anger toward his former partner and, by extension, women who he felt held power over him. In court, it was revealed that his anger was triggered by trivial memories of his past, such as his former wife cutting her hair without his permission or a girlfriend leaving him. These grievances indicate a fragile ego and a pathological need for dominance. He viewed autonomy in others not as a right, but as a personal slight against his authority. This mindset is crucial for understanding the why of the case. Innes was not simply looking for a partner. He was looking for a subject, someone he could control completely. Unlike the women in his past who had exercised their own free will, the profile that emerged was that of a high-functioning predator. His intelligence did not provide him with a moral compass. Instead, it made him more dangerous. It allowed him to plan, to obscure his intentions, and to manipulate social cues to entrap his victims. He used his status as a homeowner and a professional to gain trust, projecting an image of safety that masked his true nature. The tragedy lies in the fact that the very attributes that made him successful, his planning, his patience, and his technical expertise, were the same tools he used to execute a horrific crime. Andrew Innes was a man who could design virtual worlds, but in the real world, he proved incapable of viewing other people as anything more than broken code to be deleted when they no longer served his purpose. The engineer had become an architect of destruction, hiding in plain sight within the quiet suburbs of Dundee. The investigation into the events at Troon Avenue uncovered a disturbing technological dimension that set this case apart from typical criminal inquiries. While Andrew Innes presented himself to the world as a quiet software engineer, the digital evidence seized from his computers revealed that he had weaponized his professional skills to facilitate his predatory objectives. In a chilling fusion of modern technology and primal malice, Innes did not rely on chance encounters or serendipity to find a partner. Instead, he engineered a sophisticated digital trap, creating a custom-built computer program designed to harvest human data on an industrial scale. This was not the behavior of a lonely man seeking companionship. It was the calculated work of a hunter using algorithms to locate specific prey within the vast anonymity of the internet. Forensic computer analysts discovered that Innes had written code capable of connecting to and scraping data from 34 different dating websites simultaneously. This program allowed him to bypass the standard user experience of browsing profiles one by one. Instead, he could aggregate thousands of profiles, stripping away the humanity of the individuals behind them and reducing them to mere lines of data in a spreadsheet. This automated collection process demonstrates a terrifying level of efficiency and detachment. By treating potential partners as datasets to be mined, Innes removed the emotional component of human interaction, viewing women not as people to be courted, but as variables to be analyzed. Once the data was harvested, Innes utilized a spreadsheet application, akin to Microsoft Excel, to organize and filter the results. The investigation revealed that he had established a rigorous scoring system to grade the women he found. Each profile was evaluated against a set of specific criteria he had programmed into his worldview. If a profile met his conditions, it was awarded points. The higher the score, the more desirable the target became in his eyes. This systematic grading of human beings is a hallmark of a controlling and narcissistic personality, one that believes it has the right to judge and select individuals based solely on their utility to the perpetrator's dark needs. The most alarming aspect of this digital sorting process was the specific criteria Innes used to identify his ideal match. Analysts found that he placed little value on standard attributes such as the woman's profession, her age, or even her facial features. These superficial details, which usually drive online dating preferences, were secondary to him. The mandatory condition, the variable that resulted in the highest score, was that the woman had to be a single mother with young dependents. This preference was not born out of a desire to be a stepfather or to provide a supportive home. Rather, it was driven by a sinister recognition that single mothers, particularly those from economically developing nations, might possess a specific vulnerability that he could exploit. By targeting single mothers, Innes was effectively searching for a package deal. He understood that a mother is often looking for stability, not just for herself, but for her offspring. This dual need creates a leverage point that a manipulator can use to accelerate trust and dependency. Furthermore, The investigation suggested that his true motivation for seeking out mothers was to gain access to the children themselves. The mother was, in his algorithmic view, merely the gateway to the dependence he wished to control. This realization transformed the perception of the case from a domestic tragedy into a targeted predatory strike against a family unit. Bennylyn unwittingly entered this digital hunting ground when she created a profile on a site called Filipino Cupid, one of the 34 platforms Innes was monitoring. She was seeking a genuine connection, a partner to share her life with. Unbeknownst to her, her profile was intercepted by Innes's software. She was processed, scored, and flagged as a high-value target because she fit his specific, predatory requirements. Her status as a devoted single mother, which should have been a badge of honor, became the very trait that drew the attention of a man who viewed her existence through the cold logic of a database. The discovery of this software was pivotal for the prosecution. In many homicide cases, the defense may argue that the act was a result of a sudden loss of control or a crime of passion. However, the existence of this program provided irrefutable evidence of premeditation. It proved that Innes had been planning to locate and entrap a specific type of victim long before he ever met Bennylyn. He had spent hours writing code, refining his search parameters, and analyzing the results. The intent was baked into the hard drive of his computer. This chapter of the investigation serves as a stark warning about the invisible dangers lurking within the digital landscape. It highlights how personal information, shared in good faith on public platforms, can be harvested and weaponized by those with the technical know-how and the malicious intent to do so. Andrew Innes did not just commit a crime with his hands. He initiated it with a keyboard, using the neutral tools of technology to facilitate a deeply human tragedy. The algorithm of control he designed was absolute, reducing the complexity of human life to a series of binary choices that ultimately led Bennylyn and her daughter to the doorstep of the house on Troon Avenue. In the pursuit of justice, physical evidence often speaks volumes. But it is the human voice that provides the harrowing context of a crime. During the legal proceedings that followed the discovery at Troon Avenue, a crucial piece of testimony emerged from a witness whose presence in the house had initially been a mystery. This witness was the other young individual found in the residence during the police raid, a survivor who had lived through the terrifying events that unfolded within those walls. Due to legal protections regarding identity, this individual was referred to only as Emma during the trial. Her account provided the court with a direct line of sight into the final moments of the victims, dismantling the sanitized version of events that the perpetrator attempted to construct. The testimony provided by this survivor was described by prosecutors as one of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence ever presented in a courtroom. Through recorded interviews, the court heard how Andrew Innes had manipulated the situation using a game of hide-and-seek to manage the occupants of the house. This detail is particularly chilling, as it illustrates how innocent childhood activities were weaponized to facilitate a crime. The survivor recalled looking towards the bathroom and seeing Innes close the door, a fleeting observation that would later carry immense weight. She recounted the realization that Bennylyn and her daughter were no longer safe, a psychological burden no individual should ever have to bear. The importance of this testimony lay in its ability to contradict the defense's narrative of self-preservation. Innes had attempted to portray the event as a spontaneous reaction to a threat. However, the witness described a sequence of actions that suggested control and dominance rather than panic. She detailed how Innes had not only ended the lives of the victims, but had also subjected the survivors to a terrifying environment of restriction and abuse in the days that followed. The court learned that Innes had restricted the survivors' movement within the house, using tethers to limit freedom, a detail that draws a parallel to treating a human being with the same disregard one might show an animal. For the jury, hearing the voice of a survivor who was present in the house dissolved any ambiguity about Innes's character. It was not merely the act of violence that condemned him, but his behavior towards the vulnerable individuals who remained. He had attempted to bribe the survivor with small amounts of money to secure her silence and compliance, a transactional approach to human trauma that disgusted those in attendance. The survivor's bravery in recounting these details provided the prosecution with the emotional and factual leverage needed to prove that Andrew Innes was not a victim of circumstance, but a calculator of cruelty who had trapped innocent people in a nightmare disguised as a home. As the investigation progressed from the crime scene to the interrogation room, Andrew Innes attempted to weave a complex web of justifications to evade the full weight of the law. His defense strategy was characterized by a series of shifting narratives, each designed to minimize his culpability and cast himself as the aggrieved party. Initially, Innes admitted to the killings, but framed them within the context of self-defense. He claimed that Bennylyn had attacked him first, alleging that she had lunged at him with a sharp utensil typically used for making sushi. He argued that in a moment of fear and panic, he had used a weapon to protect himself, resulting in the tragedy. This claim of self-defense was immediately scrutinized by investigators. The forensic evidence did not support the story of a frantic struggle for survival against an aggressor. Instead, the pathology report indicated that Bennylyn had suffered injuries consistent with being struck by a heavy, blunt object, specifically a hammer, prior to the use of the sword. The presence of multiple impact wounds to the head suggested an offensive attack intended to incapacitate, rather than a defensive maneuver. Furthermore, the sheer disparity in physical power and the presence of weapons in Innes's home undermined his portrayal of himself as the victim. When confronted with the death of Bennylyn's daughter, Innes shifted his narrative to one of twisted mercy. He admitted to ending the child's life days after her mother, reasoning that the child was distressed and crying. He told investigators that he believed it was better for the child to be with her mother, framing the murder as an act of compassion. This rationalization that killing a defenseless child was a form of kindness revealed a profound depth of moral bankruptcy. It demonstrated that he viewed the lives of others as his to dispose of based on his own warped logic. In a further attempt to mitigate his responsibility, Innes introduced a psychological angle involving his past relationships. During the trial, he claimed that Bennylyn bore a physical resemblance to his former wife and that her body type reminded him of a past girlfriend. He argued that these visual triggers caused him to snap, entering a state of rage fueled by memories of past rejections and minor domestic grievances, such as his ex-wife cutting her hair without permission. This resemblance defense was an attempt to paint the crime as a result of emotional trauma rather than predatory intent. However, the prosecution dismantled this by pointing out the meticulous planning involved in his selection process, proving that he did not snap because of who she looked like, but rather he had hunted her because of who she was. Facing overwhelming physical evidence and a collapsing narrative of self-defense, Andrew Innes and his legal team pivoted to a medical defense in the final stages of the legal process. The cornerstone of this argument was the claim that Innes was suffering from a drug-induced psychosis at the time of the killings. Innes informed the court that he had been taking steroid medication for a medical condition known as Crohn's disease. He alleged that this medication had caused a severe adverse reaction, leading to steroid psychosis, which rendered him unable to control his actions or distinguish right from wrong during the critical moments. To support this claim, the defense argued that the violence was a result of a chemical imbalance rather than malice. However, the prosecution called upon expert witnesses, including forensic psychiatrists, to evaluate this theory. While medical experts acknowledged that steroids can, in rare instances, cause mood swings or psychological disturbances, they testified that there was no evidence to suggest Innes was experiencing a psychotic break that would absolve him of legal responsibility. Dr. Cowan, a forensic psychiatrist, noted that in his extensive career, he had rarely seen such a reaction and found no clinical basis to support Innes's assertion that the medication drove him to murder. The most damning evidence against the medical defense came from Innes's own actions prior to the crime. Investigators presented security camera footage from a local hardware store captured days before the incident. The footage showed Innes purchasing significant quantities of concrete and large waste bags. This purchasing behavior demonstrated clear foresight and planning. A person in the throes of a sudden psychotic break does not typically visit a hardware store to purchase the specific materials needed to dispose of bodies before the crime has even been committed. This timeline proved that he was thinking clearly and logically about how to conceal his actions long before he raised a weapon. Ultimately, the medical defense was perceived by the court as another layer of manipulation, a final, desperate attempt by an intelligent man to use his medical history as a shield. The jury was presented with a portrait of a man who was fully aware of his actions, who had planned the disposal of the victims with the same cold precision he used to write computer code. The dismissal of the steroid defense stripped away the last remnant of his cover, leaving him exposed as a calculating predator who acted with full intent and consciousness. In early 2023, the High Court in Edinburgh became the focal point of national attention as the trial of Andrew Innes reached its conclusion. After 5 days of harrowing evidence, which included the heart-wrenching testimony of the survivor, the forensic deconstruction of the house on Troon Avenue, and the dismissal of the medical defense, the case was handed over to the jury. The jury, comprised of 8 men and 7 women, bore the heavy burden of weighing the atrocities they had heard. In complex murder trials, deliberations can often take days. However, in this case, the evidence was so overwhelming that the jury returned with a verdict in less than 2.5 hours. Andrew Innes was found guilty on all charges, including the murder of Bennylyn and her daughter, as well as the physical and emotional abuse of the survivor. The swiftness of the verdict reflected the absolute clarity of the prosecution's case. Standing in the dock, the 52-year-old software engineer displayed no emotion as the word guilty echoed through the courtroom. He had denied the charges until the very end, maintaining his innocence despite the mountain of evidence against him. His lack of visible remorse was noted by everyone present, from the judge to the grieving family members in the public gallery. The presiding judge delivered a sentence that reflected the severity and depravity of the crimes. Andrew Innes was sentenced to life imprisonment. Crucially, the judge set a minimum punishment period, ordering that Innes must serve at least 36 years before he can even be considered for parole. This sentence is among the longest ever handed down in the Scottish legal system, ensuring that Innes will likely spend the remainder of his natural life behind bars. The judge described his actions as depraved and noted that even experienced police officers had been shocked by the magnitude of his cruelty. Following the sentencing, a final, chilling comment from Innes was reported, further cementing his status as a remorseless killer. He reportedly remarked to officers that if they had arrived just 24 hours later, he did not know what would have happened to the survivor, implying that the third victim was perilously close to disappearing just as the others had. This statement served as a terrifying reminder of how close the case came to being a triple tragedy. As he was led away to begin his sentence, the community of Dundee and the family of the victims finally saw the face of evil removed from society, though the scars of his actions would remain forever. While justice was legally served in a courtroom in Scotland, the emotional toll on Bennylyn's family in the Philippines continued to compound in a way that seemed almost cruel in its relentlessness. The family had endured the anxiety of the disappearance, the horror of the discovery, and the trauma of the trial. They had relied on the support of the Filipino community in the United Kingdom and the government to attend the proceedings, and to arrange for the repatriation of their loved ones' remains. The return of the ashes was meant to be a moment of closure, a time to finally lay Bennylyn and her daughter to rest in their homeland. However, just days before the remains were scheduled to arrive, a devastating fire broke out at the family's home in the Philippines. On the 7th of June, 2021, the flames consumed the house, reducing it to ruins. The fire destroyed not only the structure but also the preparations they had made for the wake. The altar, the photographs, and the personal mementos they had gathered to honor Bennylyn were lost in the blaze. It was a tragedy upon a tragedy, leaving a grieving family without a roof over their heads at the very moment they needed a sanctuary to mourn. In an interview, Bennylyn's father and sister spoke of their heartbreak. They described the pain of having to hold a memorial in a makeshift shelter, surrounded by the charred remnants of their home, without electricity, doors, or windows. They set up a simple table with candles to receive the ashes. The image of the family praying in the open air, amidst the debris of a fire, stands as a poignant symbol of their resilience. Despite losing everything material, they refused to let the circumstances diminish their love for Bennylyn. They mourned with dignity in the face of overwhelming adversity, proving that while a predator could take a life and a fire could take a home, neither could extinguish the bond of family. The case of the Dundee investigation is more than just a crime story. It is a profound societal warning that forces us to confront the vulnerabilities inherent in our modern, interconnected world. The tragedy highlights the extreme danger of isolation. Bennylyn was a woman seeking a better life, but her status as a migrant without a local support network made her a prime target for a predator who specifically sought out those he could isolate. It underscores the vital importance of community and the need to look out for those who are new to our neighborhoods, as isolation is the predator's greatest ally. Furthermore, the case serves as a grim lesson on digital safety. The fact that INIS utilized software to harvest data and filter victims based on vulnerability challenges the way we perceive online privacy. It reminds us that behind every profile is a person, but behind every screen could be a predator using sophisticated tools to manipulate and entrap. The red flags were there, the rush to move, the isolation, the too-good-to-be-true persona, but they were masked by the digital medium. This story compels us to be vigilant, to verify, and to maintain lifelines to the real world when navigating the virtual one. Ultimately, the legacy of this case is not the cruelty of the killer, but the courage of the survivors and the persistence of the family. It was the sisters' refusal to accept the silence that triggered the investigation. It was the young survivors' bravery in the courtroom that sealed the verdict. And it was the family's endurance through loss and fire that showed the strength of the human spirit. As we reflect on these events, we are reminded that justice requires vigilance, and that protecting the vulnerable is a collective responsibility that spans borders and communities. This case is undoubtedly one of the most difficult and heart-wrenching investigations we have ever covered. It reminds us that evil often wears a mask of normalcy, a successful professional, a quiet neighbor, a seemingly helpful partner, but it also reminds us of the power of intuition. Bennylyn's sister knew in her heart that something was wrong when the messages changed, and her persistence ultimately led the police to the truth. If there is one takeaway from this tragedy, let it be the importance of staying connected. Whether you are dating online, moving to a new city, or just going about your daily life, keep your support network close. Listen to your instincts, and never dismiss the concerns of those who love you. We hope this report has shed light not only on the investigative process, but on the beautiful life of a mother who simply wanted a future for her child. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth analysis. Please take care of yourselves and each other. We will see you in the next investigation.